Hello, and welcome to another show of Virtual Coffee with Ashish. Today's topic is cloud security posture management. Do we need one, or is that just a smoke and mirror screen? I've got someone to clarify this question for me because I've been asked this for some time, and I thought, why not bring someone who's been in this space for a while? For people who are joining in for the first time, this is Virtual Coffee with Ashish. We stream every week. We talk about different topics in cloud security. We talk about threat intelligence. We talk about application security and everything to do with cloud security. Basically, you can see the ticker down at the bottom. That's where the website is. This episode becomes available as a podcast as well if you're coming in, and you would see live Q&A come in as well. So every once a week, cloud security podcast. All right, I'm gonna bring my guest in because I think it's definitely time for me to introduce this awesome person. Hey, Gaurav, how are you?
Hey, Ashish, very good.
Good. Thanks for coming in, man. I think I'm really looking forward to demystifying cloud security posture management. Who else to bring in for this than yourself? How are you going?
Very good. How are you?
Good. And for people who are joining in, I can see a few people joining in as well. If you're gonna drop in a hello for Gaurav for two reasons. One, it helps me check the audio that you guys can hear both of us. And the second reason being, well, we just like hearing from you guys. It's always a good idea. If you have any questions for Gaurav as well, feel free to keep pinging them in. I do want to start with the obvious question first. You have a drink? You have a drink?
There you go.
Cheers.
Cheers.
I do want to say, when I first met Gaurav had a beard, and him and I were thinking, or at least I was thinking, we can twin the beard. My COVID beard, but clearly he got annoyed by the beard way before I did. So maybe next time we can make it happen. I'm going to start with another question, which is obvious, which is, what was your path into cybersecurity? Because it's always interesting to know where people started. So what was your path into cybersecurity?
Yeah, well, I would say that I started off when I was a little kid. I was never interested in playing with the toys, but rather breaking them apart and looking at how they really work.
Right.
I've been very inquisitive from very beginning, and as I was a teenager when I started learning more and more about electronics, and from electronics I went to computers, and I'm in general very inquisitive. So it was a very natural progression for me to just work in cybersecurity.
Oh, right. Okay. I'm not surprised. I think it seems to be almost like a theme as well, where anyone who's been inquisitive about dismantling things, although parents hate it, if any parents are listening to this, you should just encourage it, because you potentially have a cybersecurity person there in the making, isn't it?
Indeed.
What about cloud security then? What are your thoughts on, I guess cloud security is such vague definition, and we can't really have a conversation about cloud security posture management without talking about what is cloud security. What does it mean for you?
That's a good question. And I would say that in general, I like to think from very fundamentals and principles. So I think security in general, or a period of time, I would say for me, it's about having a psychological safety and having the confidence of working in an environment, right? And you can apply similar principles to the cloud, right? I think in cloud also you need to have that safety, that I have an environment where I can run my business without having to worry about security issues. So I think, to me, answer would remain the same. I mean, having a psychological safety in the cloud, it's basically it's cloud security.
Interesting. And so maybe let me put it another way as well then. But do you see it as an opportunity or as a problem area? Do you still how do you approach cloud security? I know it's only it's not, say, as old as Waterfall or some of the older ones, but cloud security being in the industry for less than 10 years. What are your thoughts on cloud security now? Is it an opportunity space or a problem space? How do you look at it?
I think every problem is an opportunity. So I think it's up to the people like us to figure out if that's something they want to solve. I think personally that it is much more rewarding to solve cloud security problems than your traditional enterprise network security problems. And I have my own reasons for that. But yeah,
Yeah,
I just
happy to explore a few more of your reasons as to why that space. And I think the reason I'm going into that question a bit more is because for people who haven't uh, gone into your bio yet, actually probably worthwhile calling out that you were the co-founder for Redlock, which was a CSPM as well, which got bought by Palo Alto, and now you're doing your own thing as well. So you've clearly worked in the cloud security space, and I've got a few people who are cybersecurity founders as well in the mix, who watch the show and listen to the show quite a bit. And I've also got budding entrepreneurs as well who are probably looking at this space and exploring this. So keen to know from your experience as to what challenges did you see that people, like, I think, first of all, cloud security posture management, what does it really do? What does it mean?
Yeah, I think as the name itself indicates, it's about having a security posture management, right? And as I was saying that it is much more rewarding. I won't say it's necessarily easier, right? But it's rewarding. The reason is this, and then we can go into the CSPM specific things, is that in the on-prem world, if you think about it, it's really like wild, wild west. Most of the data generated in the on-prem world is not structured. So if you go back like 15, 20 years, you will find that most of the security startups and companies, they had sizable engineering team whose job was to simply parse the messages, the logs.
Right.
In modern cloud world, things are more and more API driven. You have a consistent request format, response format. There are API specifications available. So you don't have to do the boring grunt work, right? So that's number one. And secondly, it's the democratization of access to their tooling. So in the past, like in the on-prem enterprises, you want to build a security product and you want to support, say, 50 different systems. How are you going to get access to those 50 different systems? You don't have an easy way. In the cloud, you just sign up, right? All the cloud service providers have made it super easy. For, I think, hobby projects, you don't even have to pay anything, right? And you get this access to all the data that you need, and you can innovate at a much faster pace. So that's the reason I believe that it's actually more rewarding.
Interesting. And I think to your point, API driven is probably one of the, I guess, qualities of being in cloud as well. And that means a lot more things are available at your disposal, as you mentioned. So if anyone looking at this as an opportunity area for maybe even, let's just talk about the maturity as well, right? Because a lot of people find it hard to talk about cloud security to the organization. Have you had some experience where people were trying to find, or I guess seeking some guidance in how do they highlight the importance of cloud security, especially in an organization which is moving into cloud, like probably in the initial migration stages? Like, what do you tell them? Why cloud security? Or actually, maybe let me just put it another way. If I'm starting in cloud security, if I am starting in cloud today, do I need a CSPM?
So there are, I think there are two dimensions about it. The first dimension is the scale, right?
Right.
Anything at scale is hard, okay? So if you are starting out in the cloud and you have a very small footprint, I think you probably don't need an expensive CSPM tool, right? So that's a scale. And the other is your maturity, right? So if you're gonna use infrastructure as code IAC templates to manage your cloud, and your developers are security conscious, right? And you have some sort of a security DNA in the engineering group, then I think you will be able to get by simply using your cloud native tools, right?
Okay.
But at a certain point, things start to break down. Like Look, I'm in this small office and we are just 4 or 5 people. We are just starting out a new company here.
Yeah.
I can ask anyone. I can raise my hand and ask, hey, what is this IP address doing, or what is this user about, right?
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
can't do that when you have 1,000 people in the company.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, just a complex, even if to your point about 100 people, 100 is a lot of people. And if 100 of them are using AWS or Azure, and I think, what about the whole, to your point about the scale, what about the layer of multi-clouds in there where a lot of us security folks, and I think that when I do a lot of consulting, I've kind of realized that inadvertent, without even knowing, a lot of people have started going multi-cloud. And it's like, everyone thinks that they're in AWS only, but then you find out this really weird small exposure that you have into Azure for some reason, or GCP for some reason. Like, is that also a time when you would consider CSPM, that if you have any multi-cloud footprint, even if it might be a small scale?
That's a good question. I would say that it's a function of how how much resources you really have. Like if you know somebody who knows these clouds, right?
Yeah.
Then again, you can use a native tooling. But if you don't have the bandwidth to go and figure out the nitty-gritties of these cloud, then probably yes. I think CSPM in that case will probably make more sense. I mean, the examples are like if you go to AWS, in AWS world, what you call as your roles are very different than if you go to GCP. The roles are very different, right?
Yep. Yeah.
Now, if somebody has been working in AWS for a long time, he or she might just try to apply the similar thinking in GCP, and that won't give any great results. So I would say so that, yeah, I mean, if you have a multi-cloud, then it probably make more sense because most likely you have a development team who knows one cloud more than anything else.
Yeah, and I think it's an interesting point as well, right? What are the problem areas you're seeing in the cloud space? And I'm looking at a few people here who've joined in, like Paul McCarthy and other people. They have startups in the cloud security space as well. And actually, the whole CSPM space didn't exist for a while unless Gartner made it official. Do you remember that story, or would you want to share that story? I think I remember where Redlock probably was the first company that kind of started talking about cloud security posture management. But then officially that thing didn't exist until Gartner made it official. Is that like, what was the story behind that?
I think it always happens that the industry analysts, they have certain way of thinking and they work with a certain set of customers. And then your industry, I think is moving at a slightly different pace, right?
Right.
So that happens all the time. I think my favorite story that comes to my mind is that how long it took for Gartner to say that web application firewalls are an independent market. It probably took them like probably 6 to 8 years, maybe more.
Oh,
like,
really?
It used to be their opinion that web application firewall, that function belongs to the IDS and IPS. It does not make sense to have a separate category for web application, right? So, and I'm not trying to blame anyone. I mean, it's just a nature of things that it takes a while for people to come to some sort of consensus that, okay, this sort of makes sense, let's just do it this way. So it took a while for everybody to recognize that there needs to be like a vertical called CSPM.
Right, and I think the great example, just taking off your WAF question or the WAF statement about, I'm pretty sure you would have seen the Signal Science got bought by Fastly for 700, and they're a WAF, and I'm like, that's all they do. They're a WAF. I'm like, I wonder if the WAF thing didn't exist in the Gartner space, how would they have sold themselves for $700 million? Like, that is just insane. But shout out to the Signal Science team. I've known Zane and other people for a while. Great guys. So coming back to our statement about the problem areas in cloud security, what do you see as the current challenges that are being solved? And I do want to go into a bit of CASB as well, because there's another product space that kind of has been I don't been there for some time, so it'll be good to go into it. But what do you see as the problem spaces in cloud security that either are being solved or not being solved or not being looked at? Like, what do you see as the problem areas?
Yeah, I think there are two major problems that I see that people are struggling with. The first is really getting a handle on where do I begin with? What do I have to where do I start from, right? Because
Hmm.
I think that, like, and we all know that it's cloud security, cybersecurity is a very busy market, like lots of vendors out there. So
Yep.
once you start figuring out, oh, I need, say, a disk encryption solution, right? And you go to Google, you look for solutions, you will find hundreds, probably thousand, I don't know. You will find lots of vendors out there who can provide you a great solution.
Yep.
But this assumes that you know that you are looking for this encryption, and these are the disks that you want to encrypt in your
Mm.
environment, right?
Yep.
So similarly, you can actually extrapolate, and the problem statement just becomes that if you know this is where you are, then figuring out how to get where you want to be becomes very easy because you have lots of tooling available.
Right.
But just getting a sense of, oh, I have these many cloud accounts, cloud projects, and the identities, and my developers are using these third-party tooling in the product. So
Yep.
just getting a sense is very hard. Okay.
Interesting.
Uh, the second problem is the scale problem, right?
Right.
It's just like there are so many changes which happen in in an environment every single day. Like people are pushing to production nowadays, blue green deployments are becoming very common. So many things are happening at the same time. When it comes to security, I think we need to recognize that we need to up our game from thinking in terms of security visibility to going into security observability.
Oh, okay.
And what I mean by that is visibility is, I would say, somewhat easier. As I said, you have immediate access to the data, right? You have
Yep.
API calls, you call the API, you get the response, and you can shove the data in a database. You can write the queries day in, day out, and you will get visibility. That's good.
Yep.
But observability is about having a mental model of of observations, being able to observe things, not just see them, right?
Yep.
So,
Yep.
for example, like you will find that uh, if your virtual machine in the cloud is making an outbound connection to some IP and some port,
Mm-hmm.
do, do you have ways to see that traffic? I would say yes. Every single cloud service provider gives you VPC flow logs or things
That's
like
right.
that, right? And you
Yep.
can
Yep.
easily look into the traffic when you need, right?
That's
The
right.
observability is where that connection is being made, and is that connection being made um, in a malicious manner or it's a benign use case? We don't know. We know that, oh, we have data, we have tooling, we can query, we have visibility, but to be able to observe, to be able to give semantic meaning to that data,
Yep.
that's observability.
So would it be more? So it's not behavioral analysis, though, right? Is it different?
It's not necessarily behavioral analysis, but it's about having a giving meaning to things. Right? so
Oh,
for
right.
so for example, like on a like in a database, if you have a SQL database, a row in a database,
Yeah.
it's a row, right? It can
Yep.
represent a network traffic going to a certain IP and port. But what is the meaning of it, right? The meaning would be that, hey, there is a source, and then there's a destination, and there's a connection being made, and the edge of these of this graph, this two node graph that represents the activity, right? So giving meaning to the things is what I would call observability, that you can observe a connection happening as opposed to thinking in terms of, yes, I have a database row which represents this connection.
Interesting, because I've heard the observability word in a logging context, and how a lot of people, I think Atlassian and a lot of other people, are going down the path where they're doing a lot of observability around logging, and so you're seeing that kind of appear in the cloud security space as well.
I think so, because we are getting to a stage where we just have so much of data, it's impossible to really make sense out of it. So we need to start thinking in terms of giving first-class citizen approach to these different models, right?
Yeah.
So network traffic as a first-class citizen, your different entities, whether they are assets or they are users, your permissions, your all these things don't really have sort of observability in the cloud. People just, they are using very general purpose solutions which are not made for security.
Oh yeah, all right. So if I think I get what you mean. So I'm not gonna name the tools over here, but to your point, it's more like a lot of these cloud security tools at the moment are talking about things like, this is what is wrong with the system. I don't know why, but because the checklist told me that this is wrong, so it is wrong. Is that what you mean? But then observability is that layer on top. It's like, oh, it's not just a checklist. Yeah, this seems like an odd behavior. You should look into this. Is that the difference between, like, a simplified difference between what you're seeing the products doing versus what they should be doing?
Yes, it's about the ability to reason things like why this is happening. If somebody is asking you a question, hey, can you explain me why this machine is talking to that machine?
Yeah.
If you think in terms of visibility, your answer would be that, yeah, it's able to talk because this is a log, this is a network traffic log, and it's able to talk. You won't be able to go to the depth of that network connection, right?
Yeah.
From observability perspective, you should be able to explain, oh, it's able to talk because there is a firewall. The firewall has rules. The rules are allowing the connection to happen. This is the process listening on this particular port. This is the traffic and everything, right?
Wow. So, and am I right in saying it sounds like it's a lot of maturity that would be required before you even can go down this path, right? Like, I can't imagine someone, to your point earlier about, if I have one AWS account or one Azure subscription or one Google project, like, I think, and maybe even if I'm a startup, for example, like, I feel like observability, should that be a thing that should start before? Like, you should start noting down these behaviors before, from the beginning. Like, how you say, a lot of people say you should have the right security foundation. Like, you should try and go, I'm going to have CloudTrail turned on the day I start. But no one really looks at, is there root console login that's I have an alert for, or should I have an alert for Ashish logging in versus Gaurav logging in? Like, no one talks about that. Everyone's like, switch on CloudTrail, switch on cloud, make sure you're using CloudWatch, make sure you have AWS Security Hub and Guard Duty. There's checklists that people go through. Do you feel like people should start looking at these or asking these questions at that point already? Like, is that what they should do?
Yeah, I would say that I think people should rather start backwards, figure out where they want to be, where they have the data, and where the risk lies, and then work backwards on how do you go about securing that environment, as opposed to blindly applying some checks, right?
Yeah.
This has been a very big pain point in the past life, where people have simply just said, oh, we are compliant with this regulation and that regulation and everything, and yet they get compromised all that time, and they say that it becomes like, they simply wash off their hands and say that, hey, we did everything we were supposed to do.
Yep.
Look, we were compliant with this, and yet we got compromised. So it must have been a 0 day, some crazy hacker ability to exploit. And eventually it comes down to something as simple as somebody not putting a password on their database server and exposing it to the internet.
Uh, and I think I've got a related question from Vineet here. Is asking, is it like Trail, or is it like is it like Trail or find insights from it? Is that what you mean by observability? Is that like a finding insights from something like a CloudTrail? I think that's kind of where he's going with it. Would that be an example of observability?
The example for me would be it having the ability to reason why something is happening. I think CloudTrail and the CloudTrail Insights are tools which can enable you.
Yep.
But more importantly, I would say that um, uh, having security codified in a way where you
Yep.
can just look at it and reason, okay, this is how things are working. Let me give an example where I've been writing a lot of code and people who are application developers here, they can attest to it that it's just like test driven development is really important, right? And
Yep.
unit test cases are important, and people should look for code coverage and everything.
That's right.
That's what I mean by observability, right? By observability, I like in the DevOps world, the observability, loosely speaking, people would say that what is your P95 and P95 latency, right? So people have well-defined metrics, a well-defined mental model of how you think of great quality code, right? Whether it's a compile time, build time, run time.
Yep.
We don't do that in security, right? Security becomes more of like, oh, this next gen machine learning, AI, ML, threat detection. So for me, it's about, as I said, having the ability to reason things, and the reasoning doesn't really have to come from like runtime data. If you look at what Vineet is mentioning, like CloudTrail, the CloudTrail is more of a runtime data. Sure,
Yep.
it's like you can look at the logs to make some sense out of it, but you can also look at your code and see how the code is behaving, right?
Oh, right. Okay. So I guess, because there's another example here from Harsh over here saying his Azure ATP and Windows Defender ATP are the examples. They give deep insights into how we can make the most out of the log, although they both require tons of tuning.
Yeah,
Is that a good example?
I think, and I'm glad that the cloud vendors are moving into that direction. If you think about the recent announcements from the AWS, Azure, GCP, all the cloud vendors,
Yep.
the new offerings they are providing now, they are more in line with how I would like the security to go. They are not there yet, but I think we are getting there, which is a very
Actually,
positive thing.
that's a really interesting point, because I mean, and I feel like you and I are at that age where we can talk about this, where a lot of security, especially for people who started off with being sysadmins and network security, a lot of conversations we used to be around, I need all the logs. I need all the logs from all the applications. I need all the logs from every Tom, Dick, and Harry that you can find in the company. I do not care where, but I need all them, right? And I remember that from my conversation with a lot of people across trying to get into this problem space as well, that people actually don't look at those logs. Like, a lot of those logs just disappear. I mean,
Yeah.
you just have a huge collection of logs, but then Splunk and all the other theme solutions came along. Then you can have this, I guess, almost like a dashboard for this amazing well, I don't want to use the word insight. It's more like, what do I want to get alerted on? I
Exactly.
always looked at it as a SOC tool. I never looked at it as like, this is telling me what I should be looking for. This is the behavior that I should be stopping. And I don't want to go into chaos engineering or one of those chaos engineering experiments, but they all believe in that concept that, well, what's the point of having all the logs? Because that's a question that a lot of security people get asked. And then the only answer that I've been able to come up with or I've heard is, oh, I need it in case there's an incident. I need to be able to go in and have a look. I mean, but then now we have cloud providers who store the logs for us. Why do I need a separate theme for that then?
Yeah.
I mean, are you seeing that shift as well? Is that where, I guess, this is the next level of maturity from that?
Yeah, I mean, if you think about the entire DevOps ecosystem, it has evolved from requiring you to log everything, and then people used to parse the logs and everything. These days, metrics is your de facto standard. You have metrics, you have tracing data available, and you have Jaeger and bunch of these technologies available in the modern microservices architecture.
Yep.
So um, I think security is somewhat lagging. Like for example, we talk about infrastructure as a code, but we don't talk about security as code. Like the technologies like CloudFormation template or Azure ARM and Terraform, all these technologies, none of them were really designed to describe your security. They were designed to describe your infrastructure as code. But I think that we will eventually get there, where we will have the ability to declaratively say that this is how I want my security posture to look like. Today, we have a lot of reliance on the runtime data. I think that will eventually come down, which is good.
Oh, that's very interesting. And to your point about how data is being looked at right now, in terms of, I guess, is that, are we not doing a good job at it? Is that why? I mean, and coming back to the question, is that why it's still a problem that people haven't identified yet? Or, I mean, the majority of organizations still just collecting logs, I guess. Let's just put
Yeah,
the other way to put it.
yes, I think we are sort of, it's an N-1 thing. So if the latest and the greatest innovations in the DevOps engineering is and I can see Paul mentioning
Yeah.
security as code. So I think security is like always like one step behind. But with the advent of cloud, I think we will be at a stage where we will be almost close to N, if not at N, right? So
Right.
rather than thinking always in terms of logs, and logs, we should be thinking more and more about, okay, give me the metrics, give me your codified security. And as I said, the reliance on the runtime data, it's not a great thing for security.
That's really interesting. And I think coming from a world where a lot of people in the cloud security space are thinking that actually remediation is the way forward, like auto remediation is the way forward. Like, people are not even thinking from a, like, how do I've got all this data coming in and I'm responding to a lot of that. But a lot of people are not thinking from a perspective of, well, why do I need to auto remediate when I can prevent it in the first place? Right? I think people are not thinking prevention. They're actually thinking, and somehow that's proactive. And like, I don't know how that's proactive to auto remediate. The whole messaging for me was wrong. Although the whole industry keeps talking about prevention is better than cure. Like it's like such an old proverb. But do you feel observability is also a step towards the whole prevention way, where you or is it more something that is a foundational layer for, I guess, prevention?
Yeah, I think it will be very unfortunate if we start thinking about visibility and observability in terms of runtime data, actually, right? To me, observability means that I can go to a Git repo, look at the code, and reason and say that whether systems are working the way they are supposed to be working. Right. If I can guarantee that the changes happening to the cloud can happen only via infrastructure as code or security as code, whatever you want to call it, then I just don't have to look at runtime data. Right. I can just look at the code and say that, okay, no, this can't happen. Like, it's like if your systems have gone down, you are having an outage, right? What do developers do? Of course, they look at the runtime data. That gives them some sort of that's how they get the indication that something is wrong. But to debug it, right, they have to look at the code, right? So something like that, I think something like that needs to be done for the security world, where we can simply look at a Git repo and reason about security.
Actually, that's a great point. And I think people still, and I know I have a lot of fellow supporters here who believe that the new world of security is actually turning into, like, security folks are turning into coders as well. May not be the best coders, but at least we're turning into developers of some form. developing infrastructure or security controls or codifying them. And I think it's probably a good segue into the other topic that I want to cover as well, which is CSPM for not CSPM, sorry, CASBs. Like, for people who don't know what CASB is, if you can just give what's your understanding of CASB and what do you think of that space?
Yeah, so the way that I think about CASB versus CSPM is more of a consumer versus publisher of software, right? So let me explain. If you are consuming a lot of that, the consumption is done in a secure manner. Whereas if you are building applications and you have your customers who are going to consume your application, the publisher, you are actually a software publisher who is uploading your code to some cloud and then people are going to consume it, that's when you probably want to think about CSPM. Now, from a security, the core principles still apply, and that's why you will find that CASB players will try to get into or are slowly getting into the CSPM space and vice versa.
Oh, yep. Okay. And I think that kind of goes into with Paul's comment as well. It's also known as the way InfoSec finds rogue AWS accounts.
Yeah. That's a start. I mean, although I think to Paul's point, I mean, that that's a symptom of a problem, I would say, but not a problem itself. Like anytime you have to manage spreadsheets and some sort of wiki to simply look at your digital assets, I think you are doing something wrong, especially if you are at any sort of a reasonable scale.
It's really interesting you mentioned that, because as a part of this, talking about letting people know about this episode, I had a poll out. And if you had a chance to look at it, but I think the poll question was more on how do you manage the assets, or how do you find out what to protect in cloud? And some of the options that I had was a Confluence page, spreadsheet, and a CSPM. Majority answer was CSPM, but there were still a few people who had spreadsheets and Confluence. And I'm like, I wonder at what point would they have to shift? Because I still feel like if you're not I guess my personal opinion on this is that CSPM is still not like a true reflection sometimes. Like you could have multiple organizations, right? You could have a legacy, you could have a like one main organization in AWS. And so using the AWS example over here, and that new AWS organization has your CASB and everything, or sorry, the CSPM in there, but the old organization is not even looked at. And there's no way for this to find out that, hey, you have another organization, you probably should look at that as well. But people would look at this and go, actually, yeah, I know all my assets in cloud. I'm like, maybe not. But I mean, that's my obviously reservation from what I've seen in the industry. And I really find it interesting about, do you feel it's as part of maturity as people are going into the space, should they start looking at, like, even if they're starting today in, say, Azure or Confluence, or sorry, not Confluence, Azure or AWS, should they start using these digital assets as like a CMDB kind of a thing as well? And you may not go for a CASB or a CSPM in the first go, but at least you can start pulling this digital asset information. Like, is that, because there are open source tools for that you and I obviously have quite a bit told about. Yep.
Yeah, I think that should be really the step one of anyone taking on the cloud security journey, I would say, is that you just need to know what you have. And if you don't even know what you have, how can you go about securing it? I would say that anyone who answers that my CMDB is CASB or CSPM, I would say that's half truth, because that's the one that you know of. That's the one where you actually deployed CSPM, right?
That's right.
What about the ones that you don't even know of? This is sort of an unknown problem, that you don't know what you don't know, right?
Yep.
So that's why I think that there is a need for somebody to start investing, like I would say, like anyone who's starting out on any security program, and the first thing, the very fundamental, just get an inventory of things, and please don't use spreadsheets, and your answer shouldn't be like, 6 months back we went through this audit and this is the spreadsheet. That is 6 months back. In 6 months, do you know how many accounts, how many organizations were created in AWS and
I
everything?
mean,
So
and how many new services has AWS released or Azure released that you're not even
exactly,
aware of? Like
exactly.
they come. I mean, shout out to the podcasts that are there for last week in AWS and other ones as well. I mean, there are knowledge bases dedicated for finding out how many services have been released just in the past week. Right? It's like that's how quickly this thing is evolving. And just quickly on the comment, Paul mentioned that this is why attack surface mapping is evolving into this space as well. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think, and I'm glad that there are actually new startups who are trying to solve this problem where they look at your security coverage. So they look at these are the digital assets you have, and this is a security tooling you have, and it seems like based upon what you have, your tooling is not covering this much or is covering this much. So this is somewhat analogous to like, oh, you have 100 lines of code and 70% of the lines are not even being covered. So I'm glad that people are starting to think in that direction.
I've got a question from Darpan as well. He's a big fan of yours, by the way. Any recommendation on getting over the alert fatigue resulting from the CSPMs or CASPs?
Either pen. So I would say that start out sort of listing what you need from a CSPM vendor. I mean, if you think about it, CSPM vendors give you a lot of options, a lot of policies, right? But do you really need all of the policies all of the time? Probably not, right? So figure
Mm-hmm.
out the important ones and start monitoring those. Um, so that will be my first recommendation. And second one is that look at the root cause. Why are you getting the alert at first place? Are you, and don't try to recognize the symptom, but don't solve the symptom, right? Try to figure out the problem behind the problem, right? So oftentimes we get some data, we think, oh, this is a problem, I just go and fix it. I think take multiple steps back and think about why did it happen in the first place, right?
Yeah.
So these are the two things I can
Observability all the way. I've got one more question about I guess the space itself as well. In terms of, like, we spoke about CASB and we spoke about CSPM as well, and we spoke about, I guess, at what stage would you require? And to kind of take in the leaf from Darpan's question about alert fatigue, there's almost like a compliance at scale question as well. That's comes. I mean, a lot of people look at CSPM and CASBs as compliance at scale. Like, oh, I can be compliant to, earlier your point, I know I was compliant because all these checklists is passed, right? Do you see that being done well using CSPMs, or is that also something which people need to kind of have another observability layer, or how do you see that done, or if it's done well at all?
Yeah, so I would say that even though I was a founder of a CSPM startup, I think people who are compliant and they have a good security posture, it's not because they actually invested in CSPM. That's good to have, nice to have. Please go and buy it. It's good. But I think it's one of those things like people who are happy, they are happy. They are not happy because they have some of those things, right?
Yeah.
So it's like following the similar principle. Like you shouldn't go out and start chasing compliance, right? Start chasing the fundamentals, and you will recognize that once you do that, you will automatically become compliant.
Interesting.
Right? Like for just like in AWS world, you have now concept of SCPs, right? Service control policies. If you just start out with having very restrictive SCPs to begin with, I think you will be mostly fine. Like disable the root login, only whitelist certain services that you're gonna use.
Yeah.
You will recognize that your attack surface area has reduced considerably, right?
Yeah.
Most of the times you are not running in multiple regions. Like most critical applications are running in a specific region, and how, as I said, security is always following a step behind the application engineering and the latest and the greatest in the tech.
Yeah.
Um, so from monolithic applications, people went to microservices, right? So
Yeah.
similarly, I think people should start thinking about moving away from mono clouds to micro clouds and have application specific cloud accounts, right?
Yeah.
Those are easier to manage. So to answer your question, this is a sort of a roundabout way to answer your question. Like, how can you do a good job of being compliant at scale? I would say that don't, first of all, just follow the principles and try not to have a monolithic cloud and have purpose-built cloud accounts and projects for your needs.
Do you reckon that's it's just going to be my bias as well, right? I feel like a lot of people have a very different motivation to get into the cloud, and it's really George has an interesting comment. Team, I disagree that security teams are lagging behind development teams. Yeah,
And they just smile after that. So I don't know,
yeah,
George.
that's right. It's like we all know the smiley is like there's a reason for that smiley. With I think it's really interesting to your point that I feel like a lot of people are approaching the cloud in a different way. Like a lot of reasons that I was listening to why people move into the cloud. One was cost saving, moving fast. Do you feel like there should be a third one about security as well? Because we kind of touched on this thing that actually you can have a lot better security because you would be more aware of where your assets are real time. You can have an insights layer to what you're collecting without buying an additional SIEM. Like there's so many things you're getting. I mean, I know I don't want to sound like I've been drinking the cloud Kool-Aid for a while that I keep telling people to go in the cloud. But do you feel like there should be like security should also be a reason why people should go in? Like I think into cloud, and there is and to I guess to Joy's point, we may be lagging behind, but we're not that behind as well. To the point that we can actually embrace it and be at the same pace as the DevOps team or one of those. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would say that in general, cloud is easier to manage than any on-prem environment. So with that ease of management, you obviously get benefit in security also.
Right.
And yeah, and as I said, I that's why I chose my word carefully when I said that it's more rewarding, because I won't necessarily say that it's easier, right?
Yeah.
Because yes, it's easier to manage, but you still have to put in some efforts. You still have to learn the nuts and the bolts of the cloud and the data structures, this and that. But that's the work that I think people would enjoy more than writing regex to parse the log.
Or a regex to have your WAF like block something which is particular. That's a big good one as well. That's a good one, and I think it's worthwhile calling out. And this is kind of like towards the tail end of our show as well. It's worthwhile calling out. It's good to have, I guess, almost a conclusion kind of a thing as well. And would love to get your thoughts on this, but I feel like CASBs are good, CSPMs are good, depending on what state of cloud maturity or how much you're in cloud already. But there would always be that you still need to have a team which understands cloud. You just can't just rely on a tool and think that, it's all good. Like, I've got a CSPM, it's all covered. I've got a CASB, it's all covered. I know exactly what's happening. Would you agree?
Strongly, very strongly. Yeah, I mean, as I said, don't chase compliance, don't chase these tools and everything. Just follow the principles, right? And
Yeah.
and you will be fine.
I know, and I think it's been really interesting because I personally haven't found a lot of people talking about cloud security training, and I feel like, I mean, to the point that I mean, this is a sly, I guess, put in as well, but because I've been doing some kind of a beta course as well for this, because I feel like there's. I'm keen to know from your side, how do you find people doing cloud security training? As in, have you come across anything that people use for? And I know I don't want to use a cloud guru and all, because I don't think they do. They're more for engineers and developers. They're not really for security. Would you? I don't know if you've seen those, and if you have
Yeah,
resources
I
that
have
maybe
seen
you
those,
share
and
with the
that's a
team.
good point. Honestly, I haven't come across really like cloud security focused curriculum. And yeah, no, I think that would be nice. That would be nice for somebody
Awesome. All
to.
right. You guys, you heard it first. There's no one. I mean, I can definitely make it. Like, I'm making the first one then. I can, I was the first guy to make cloud security podcast and the first guy to make a cloud security training. That's pretty awesome. Now, any final thoughts before we move into the last segment? Any final thoughts you want to share with people about CSPM and CASB's?
Let's see. Yeah, as I said, focus more on codifying security. Use CSPM, because CSPM vendors and CASB vendors, I would say that over a period of time, you will find that they will not have just one offering. Like it won't be accurate to think that, oh, CSPM is for runtime security, because CSPM vendors are also evolving with times, right? So don't just focus on runtime security, focus on your infrastructure as code. And also, for sure, just don't focus entirely on infrastructure as code. It's not like you're not going to look at your guard duty alerts in AWS.
Yeah.
So find a balance, right? But I just find that oftentimes people buy the tools, they enable, they put them in, they get a lot of alerts, and then they get burned. They just spend all the time in addressing the alerts, and then they question the meaning of life, that what am I doing, like all day in, day out, all I'm doing is really investigating these security alerts, and they happen to be false positive.
Oh, and yeah, perfect. And I think it's a good segue and a good conclusion to this, I guess, from a technical perspective. But I've got some fun questions as well, and I do want to call out the fun questions. I know I didn't mention this earlier, which is like very super simple. The three questions. What do you spend most time on when you're not working on cloud or technology in general?
I like to just learn about things a lot. I just enjoy researching things and going to the depths of things which I find interesting. So, for example, not recently, it's been a while, I got into coffee. And
you're speaking my language.
I have been on this quest on how to make the greatest cup of coffee. And it made me realize, you can actually draw some parallels, that a lot of people invest a lot of money in like coffee machines. The very first thing they will ask you about if they have a great coffee is that, hey, which coffee machine do you use, and which mechanism do you use? Similarly, I have a friend of mine, he's a great photographer, and anytime people are looking at the pictures he shot, they say, oh, wow, what camera you have? In both the cases, it's not a coffee machine which makes great coffee. It's not the camera which is taking great pictures, right? It's actually the coffee. You have to find the greatest coffee. You need to find freshly roasted coffee. Similarly, if you want to take a great picture, you have to focus on your lights. You have to focus on your lens. Camera is the least of their problems. And you can draw some parallels in how we actually do cloud security or anything else. Is like, don't focus on all these tools and all, just focus on the fundamentals.
Yeah. Oh, okay. And I sounds like I need to go a bit more deeper into the coffee thing with you, but I'm going to leave that for another conversation. What is something that you're proud of, but is not on your social media?
Oh, that will be very hard, because anytime you do anything interesting, it comes on social media. It's very hard to not, like, even if you don't want to put it, somebody else will actually put it.
Oh, yeah, fair enough. It's hard to control that though.
Yeah. But I would say that I'm very proud of all the work that we did at Redlock and the entire team, and um it's been fairly rewarding. I think more than the product and everything, I think we were able to make people recognize the need for cloud security. So as more like as a company, I would claim that we were the thought leaders.
No, I mean, I think you guys were, and I still remember when I got introduced to Redlock ages ago. Like probably I met Varun, and it was like, yeah, you guys were ahead of your time, man. At that point, now everyone's like, oh, CSPM, blah blah. But I think there were very few. Oh, Paul is like, I would argue that a great person. Fair point, man. Fair point. Fair play. Last question for you: what's your favorite cuisine or restaurant that you can share with us?
Oh, favorite cuisine? Coffee.
You survive on coffee. That's pretty much it, man. Now,
Yeah,
that's a great answer. I think that's pretty much you and I both injecting ourselves for three. Wait, how many cup of coffees do you have in a day? Out of curiosity,
I'm trying to cut down. I'm at two now.
you're trying to cut down, dude. Like I thought people just increase. Like, isn't that the point? You're like, I need to have more.
Yeah, but then the more you have it, the more you want to have it, and then it never ends.
Yep. Fair point, my friend. Fair point. So where can people find you on the internet or worlds to, I guess, they want to follow up on something and try and talk more about cloud security space? Where can they find you?
Yeah, just hit me up on LinkedIn. Send me a message. I accept most of the requests, I think, except for recruiters. But yeah,
Yeah,
just hit me up.
fair point. Just yeah, I mean, I'll be careful of the recruiter ones. Some of the recruiter ones, some recruiters are good, but some of the ones are like, oh my god, like, did you even check my profile, or did you just think, what do you want me to be an engineer? Did you say, or like, sure, I will be an engineer. But thanks so much for taking the time out, man. I really appreciate it. And I'll put the link in the show notes as well for people who are listening in to the podcast, so they can come and connect with you and talk to you about this as well. But this has been really awesome, man. I think I've definitely learned. Added a few more layers. I thought I knew about the CASP and CSPM space, but they definitely have given me some interesting insights as well. But yeah, I'll be awesome, man. Thanks so much for taking the time out. I really appreciate it, and I'm pretty sure all the guests did as well, based on the questions and the comments you saw as well. I want to bring to a close, but I'm gonna see everyone else next week, and hopefully I can bring you back as well sometime.
For sure. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for coming in.